last few months, that ability to maintain a positive brand and also your personal reputation during these challenging times has been quite difficult. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in or even what level you're in within an organization, your own reputation and your organizational reputation is really important right now. So we're going to just cover a few areas in this presentation. We're going to talk first about balancing empathy and results, and the need to get this right between the tension between kind of looking after our people, looking after our external clients, looking after our stakeholders, but also driving for results at a time when we need them more than ever. So we'll cover that first off. And we're going to talk about the difference between communication and action and making sure they align. And once we've done that and got an understanding of a high level of what we're trying to achieve with this, then we'll get into the kind of how do you do it. So on a personal level, how do you do it on a personal level? On a business level, what can you be doing? And then how do you do that to then, I guess, message that in terms of your communications and your messaging, both internally and externally. And the reason this is so crucial right now is because typically a lot of organizations go straight to points 5 and 6 on this agenda, and a lot of individuals, even at the CEO level, don't even think about it on an individual level. And so it's crucial at the best of times, but it's even more crucial now. So hopefully you'll come away with some good ideas and some tips and tricks that you can try to see how you can think about your branding both on an individual and a personal level and a business level in the marketplace at the back end of this half an hour. As Michelle said, if you've got any questions, feel free to type them in. I'll go through the slides and then I'll stop for questions at the end. So do feel free to type any questions or any comments or any feedback as we go. So let's start off by talking about empathy and results. And it's really important when you think about this, because in all of your businesses, you'll have clients, you'll have people that you're trying to sell your products and services to, but you'll also have suppliers to your industry, to your organization, that are trying to sell services and products to you. And we've all had that situation where we've really kind of had different people on the continuum in terms of whether they're too empathy driven or too results driven. And be interesting, and feel free to make a comment in the chat function if how many of you have had a call from a salesperson as we've been going through the last few months where they've really been quite pushy, and you've just thought to yourself, goodness me, don't they understand that we're really struggling at the moment? Don't they understand that our industry has been really impacted? There's no way I can even talk to them now, and yet all they're trying to do is sell me something. And that can be a real turn off. And that's that kind of somebody that's really on the results continuum. The flip side of that is you might have had a call from one of your suppliers where they've been really genuinely interested. They've chatted to you. How are you going? Are you okay? They've been really lovely about everything. You know, is there anything we can do for you? And they've been genuinely caring. They might have offered to allow you to hold off paying some bills for a while, or they might have allowed you to use their services or products at a reduced fee, or or even for free sometimes. And you've thought to yourself, gosh, that's lovely and it's really helpful, but I need them to keep going because they're a good supplier and I don't want them to go out of business. So these are the extremes that we're experiencing on this continuum between empathy and results. And right now, it's a real challenge because we know that people and organizations are doing it tough, and we know that you are doing everything you can to keep your job safe and to keep the other jobs in your organization safe, and you need to drive results at a time when the economy's a little volatile to make that happen. But the best way to do that is to ensure that you're looking after your people and looking after your internal people, but also your external stakeholders as well. So a very important thing to think about. And part of how you do this is really comes down to confidence. You know, if you've got confidence in the products that you're supplying and in the services that you're providing, if you've got confidence that they genuinely make a difference and they're genuinely helping people or genuinely meeting a purpose, then you can be much more confident to have those conversations. And the thing that's happened as a result of COVID is that sometimes the way in which your products or services help people might have changed. And so if you're making, let's say you're making some sort of plastic products that you're recycling. I was talking to a friend of mine who recycles plastics into earrings and sells them to Country Road, for example. But if you're making products, what people might want to buy or what they might do at the moment might change entirely. So having a thinking about what your products or your services are doing, if you haven't acknowledged in the way in which that's changed and you don't have the confidence in having those conversations in a different way, then you're going to struggle on this continuum. And the thing, I guess the final thing to think about is with that is, in what way are you serving right now? In what way are you serving your customers? In what way are you serving your staff members? In what way are you making a difference to help your organization and also the broader economy keep going? Because if you have that kind of at the foundations of what you do, that helps you then build out your plan around communication, your plan around some of your branding, knowing that it's coming from a good place, because otherwise it can feel a bit empty. Which is why this next piece is really important, because there's a very big difference between communication and action. Initially, when I put these slides together, I actually had a picture of Donald Trump up here, and I felt like it was almost too controversial to have that now. But really important that what we communicate and the way in which we act are in alignment. We've all had personal experiences of bosses or suppliers or customers where what somebody has said and the action that has been taken don't match each other, and that can be a really troubling thing. So once you've built that foundation that we were just talking about in terms of having the confidence in your product and service, and knowing that you are serving and knowing the way in which that's serving with how the world has changed in the last few months, then you want to have a think about the ways in which you're communicating and the ways in which you're taking action in relation to that, because it's really important to be authentic. It's really important to make sure that they're aligning up. And one of the best ways to check if you're being authentic is to seek feedback. We are seeing a significant, in all the organizations we deal with across all different sectors, we're seeing a significant increase in people seeking feedback from their internal staff and feedback also from their customers or their suppliers. And it's a really good way to check that what you think you're saying is actually what's being said, and that the message that you're giving is matching the actions out there. The other thing with that is, don't be afraid to listen to critics, because when you seek feedback, and you need to do it anonymously so that people will tell you what they actually want to tell you. If you're in any level of seniority, most people will tell you what you want to hear, or even if they're trying to tell you what they want to tell you, they kind of try and soften it a little bit. So it's quite hard to get really honest, direct feedback when you need it the most. So if you do anonymous feedback, you can really get that information, and listen to your critics. Really listen to those that are criticizing you and your organization. It's okay if you kind of consider that and then decide that for whatever reason it might not be valid in terms of the truth, but it's still valid in terms of how that person feels. So having to think about how can you change that perception and what might that impact. And one of the best ways to think about that once you've got that feedback is to just review your values and think, how does it align to your values? Most organizations will have values on their website, or some people have it up on the walls in their work sites. And it's interesting though how often those values are not aligned to the actual values of the organization. It doesn't mean the actual values are bad, it's just often they're not the right ones. So we want to think about what we're communicating and how we're acting. How do they align to our actual values, and how do we get those together, and how do our values become real, and how do they really represent who we are? And then from that you can then think about your communication. And when I'm talking about communication now, I'm talking about how you promote yourself as an organization, as an individual. One of the biggest mistakes we see people make, even during kind of non-pandemic times, is that they think this promotion piece is something that is only sits within the marketing team or the marketing person. It's not something that anyone else really has to think about, and they maybe misunderstand the value of ensuring that everybody in the organization takes this seriously, and everybody in the organization thinks about their role individually and their branding individually, and the organization's role and branding. And you can only earn the right to get everybody to think about it if you've been through that step first, check through whether what you're doing is authentic, to seek some feedback and align it with your values. Otherwise, if you ask other people to join in and help with it, it's going to be incongruent to them and they won't participate in it. So it is critical to promote what you're doing right now. It's one of the best ways to try and to get your brand out there as we try and get the economy back on track, and to try and drive for those results. But it needs to be done in the right way so that it doesn't lose the empathy piece that we were talking about at the beginning. So when you've thought about those aspects, the continuum in terms of the empathy results, and then where you sit on the communication and action, as I say, that's your foundation and your base layer in terms of your flooring, let's say, if we keep the analogy going. Then you can actually take the steps of the what now. And if you take these steps too soon without looking at the base layer, then you're going to build walls that will crumble. But you can now, once you've done that, you can then think about what now. And one of the things that people most often miss is what we call personal branding. And for a lot of you, that's going to feel quite uncomfortable. You know, I know a lot of people, particularly if you're a quite a humble person naturally, or you're also maybe more of an introvert, the idea that you have to put yourself out there, the idea that perhaps you have to put some effort into making sure you come across a certain way, that feels a bit icky to some people. But we live in a world where if people don't know us, they're not going to use us, or if they do know us and what they know of us is not in line with what we're trying to sell, or the job we're trying to do within our organizations, that's also not going to sit well with them. So we do need to make sure that we are keeping our personal branding in line with what we're trying to achieve. So first thing to do is to check yourself. You know, do you do any kind of communication or promotion? And if you do, is it authentic? Are the messages matching your actions, as we talked about? There's no point thinking about it at an organizational level if you're not doing it for yourself. We had an interesting experience in our organization through this. We actually encouraged everybody. We said, you know, please get out more on social media, make more comments, do some videos, do different things. Because obviously, you know, you can imagine the recruitment industry has been impacted quite significantly with what's happened. And people were a little reticent in our organisation at first, but one or two started, and then more and more started. And as people in our team got more and more confident doing a bit more on that personal branding, the feedback they've got has been great. And it's actually encouraged this virtual circle. And most of them said, I just didn't have the confidence. I didn't think anyone would want to hear from me. But as long as it's not, look at me, unlike the little monkey here, if it's more, how can I serve you? What information do I have that's going to help our customers right now that they might not have access to? Then that's been really valuable for people. And it's something that I think we've learned through this, that we can share more, and actually by helping others, we can help increase our personal branding. So do first of all think about whether you're doing enough yourself, and in what ways are you doing it. And do a bit of an assessment on whether or not it is where it's sitting on that empathy versus results continuum, and really just have a think about that. And maybe you might need to tweak what you're doing and make sure it's sort of striking the right balance, because you can't think about it for your business until you've thought about it for yourself. If you're in a position of leadership, any of you, and you're thinking about trying to encourage those in your business to do this, you're not going to win others over if you're not doing it well yourself. It's the whole you do as I say, not as I do. It doesn't work as a leadership style, unfortunately. The other thing is, if you're not in a leadership position, if you're not necessarily in the position where you can kind of be the one to officially encourage this, you'd be surprised how much influence you can have, even if you're not in that position yourself, just by starting to do things, starting to suggest things, starting to encourage some activity amongst your teammates and your organization that can actually have a bit of a snowball effect. So you can actually have an impact on your business no matter what level you're at with this. So what you need to do then is, once you've looked at your personal branding, you need to have a bit of a think about what are the key messages for your business now, and particularly in how it needs to promote itself. You might find, and most of you will find, that this has changed in some way. I did a webinar recently where we were talking about a time to transition and all the ways in which industries and sectors and businesses has changed. And one of the consistent themes was that almost every business has changed in some way through this. An example would be some of the restaurants, for example, obviously with some of the social distancing rules. This was a great one from overseas, where, I don't know if you've seen it, they had tables on wheels with big rubber tires around, so they could wheel around outside and bump into each other. It's kind of like halfway between bumper cars and individual tables, and it created a bit of a fun atmosphere in this outdoor cafe, and it's been adopted. It looks great. But that's a different way in which that business has gone about providing outdoor entertainment, outdoor eating to its customers, and that's given it a unique positioning in the market, which has attracted people to that cafe and restaurant over others. So think about the way in which your business has changed, because that's going to affect your key messages. And then think about the channels that you're communicating through. Chances are most of you will be using channels that you've always used, and they might be the right channels, but if you're not reviewing to check and to see, because with most of the world becoming much more in line in the last 3 months, it might be that some of your channels are not as effective, and it might be that you need to up other channels. Michelle and I were just talking before we broadcast then about how quickly we had to transition to webinars. We used to run events. We have an office in Sydney that holds up to 90 people, theatre style, and we used to run all our events in our offices and invite people in, and we've made the transition to doing everything via webinar. Now that's a new channel for us. But the great thing is, if you consider new channels, is you might find that the new channel gives you access to new members of your community, potential new customers that you may not have had before. So really do spend a bit of time looking at that. You might find that you've moved to more online purchasing. There might be at-home services, different ways in which you can actually reach out to people, and make sure you're putting enough time and effort into making sure that your customers know that they can use those channels, because if they're not aware of it, it comes back to the promotion piece, they can't make it happen. The next thing to think about, and this is a tricky one, is you really want to separate out your sales and marketing functions. Now, some of you might have one person that does all, and I get that, and that can be quite tricky. But even if it's one person, make sure you're very clear on what's a sales function and what's a marketing function. And you need to not get them muddled up into being the same thing. What you want to do is take your key messages that you agree for your customers and your clients and what they are, and tweak all your marketing strategies accordingly. So all your marketing strategies are all about how you get the messages out there in kind of different channels. But then you want to think about the sales function, which is how do you have more specific, targeted, one-on-one type conversations, or B2B or B2C type conversations that's going to generate actual sales. So the marketing messages support that. So you might be known before you're approaching those sales, and the sales makes it happen. And one of the things that we've seen the best organizations do as they've adapted through this is they've retrained their sales staff to make sure that the way in which they're approaching their sales conversations is completely tailored for the environment we're in. And asking questions that we have always asked in this environment is not going to work. You need to go in with that right balance that we talked about with empathy and results. So coming up with, a one pager of relevant questions that you might ask a potential customer that are only pertinent to this situation, to help open up the conversation and also show some empathy up front. So really thinking about how you can do that. And the main thing here I want you to consider in terms of separating your sales and your marketing functions is that you might think that you have a sales team and they're the particular people that are responsible for bringing revenue in, but everybody in your organization can contribute to the sales function in that, and this goes back to how you align internal communication, in that what they say and how they talk to their family members, to their friends, anything they might put on their own personal social media, or on if they comment and like on the business social media, that all contributes to the sales and marketing. And you'd be surprised how much of a funnel of opportunity you might have in the people in your organization that aren't officially in a sales function. So it's also worth taking a bit of time to retrain those people that aren't in a sales function, just so that they know how have you shifted, what's changed. If somebody happens to ask them, or they happen to be the person that answers the phone, they at least got enough of an understanding to initiate the conversation and hand it over to the right person, so you're not missing opportunities. Because it's crucial right now that we can take all of those opportunities to help get all our businesses back on track. So that's the training piece I was talking about. Really important to spend some time on that. And this is all kind of behind the scenes before you ever go externally. One of the things that I'd recommend you think about training your people on is a simple agenda we use to have conversations with people. It's the most effective way to have conversations with your customers. And this is why this technique can be taught to anyone, regardless of whether it's officially a salesperson or not. But it's also a great technique for any difficult conversation. It's actually a technique that you can use if you're having an argument with your spouse, for example, or your partner, or if you're trying to get your teenage son to do something that he doesn't want to do. So, this technique can be really, really useful tool for thinking about how can I communicate? How can I ensure that from a communication perspective that we both come away from the communication on the same page with an outcome that works for both of us? And the reason I'm spending time on this, you might think, well, what's communication got to do with personal branding, with business branding and being remembered, is that how you communicate with people, both internally and externally, will make the biggest difference to how you make people feel, which will make the biggest difference to how they remember you and how they talk about you. So simple step 1, build rapport with the person. Step 2, probe for information, just ask lots of questions. Step 3, present solutions. Step 4, close. Now the trick here is, just to break this down a little bit, build rapport doesn't mean you have to be all super chatty and friendly and lovely. It can be if that's your style, and it can definitely be if that's the style of the person you're talking to. But if the style of the person you're talking to is pretty direct and speedy, being all chatty and lovely is probably going to irritate them a little bit. So the trick with building rapport is trying to just adapt that slightly. You don't want to be fake. You don't want to not be who you are as a person, but just try and adapt your style a little bit to help make sure that the communication works, and judging how much sort of small talk you should have to build that is an important one. The biggest thing here, though, is the probe for information. The mistake we see people make when they're trying to have this conversation, they're trying to get to an outcome, they're trying to, I guess, get messaging out there, is that they might ask a question. So the question might be, let's say, do you have any needs for my new product? No, we don't, because we ordered some last month. And then automatically you might jump in and go, yeah, but you've always ordered some every month for the last few months, so you're about time for a new one. So you jump in before without listening. And it's the biggest mistake people make in this kind of communications, biggest mistake people make in arguments. If you're trying to, when I talked about solving an argument with your spouse, is the jumping in thing. And we're all tempted to do it because we all spend too much time thinking about what we want to say rather than that active listening. So the real trick to this is asking question after question after question and not jumping in. Section 2 of this agenda should be the longest section in your whole conversation. And it should go, it should be the point where you're really listening and you're really understanding, because it's only when you've really taken the time to understand what the other person needs that you can actually present them with a solution that's going to work. And if your solution is not going to work, you're not going to present that solution to them, because all that's going to do is make you that pushy salesperson that nobody likes. And it might be that you agree to, your action, your close might be, okay, well, we'll talk again in 3 months' time when things might have changed. But at least you've kept them on side during the process. So really making sure you follow that agenda is a way in which can help you internally, externally, and it can help your team members internally and externally have those conversations to get that balance of communications right. Because as I said a minute ago, people will forget. I love this quote. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And if you're unsure about that, if I ask you to think of the person that made you feel, the time a boss said something to you that made you feel like you were the most accomplished worker, that gave you the biggest piece of recognition, that feeling, I can bet you now you're all sitting there with a little warm smile inside, and that feeling's really important to you. If I can also ask you about a time, maybe as a customer, when somebody upset you and they didn't listen to you, and how angry that made you feel because they just dismissed you and they didn't listen to what you were saying. It's not necessary, often it's the actual thing that happened is very small, but it's the way it makes us feel that impacts us. And everybody, when we ask that, everybody's always got really good examples of products or services that they will never use again just off the back of a bad customer service experience. So really how you make that person feel is crucial. So I've spent a lot of time on all that kind of prep stuff, and part of that is because if you don't do all of that prep stuff, if you don't think of all of those things behind the scenes, you just jump straight to communications, that's where you can get the tone wrong. And that's where, and particularly right now when we're in quite tricky times, if you get it wrong, you can absolutely be remembered for the wrong reasons. And the whole point as we navigate through this is we want our personal brand and our business brand to come out ideally is stronger than ever, and at the very least, if not in a good position, so that when our industries and our sectors pick up, we're ready to go with it. So doing that background work is crucial, because then you can think about, well, what are your internal and external communications? Are they consistent in theme? It's a crucial thing. Are you actually doing the right communications? Are you doing enough of them? And really importantly, have you increased your volume? You probably need to communicate more now than you have ever done before, because it's important that you do lift that. But if you just jump straight to this and you get that communication wrong, that can be damaging, obviously. And then you want to actually get into the granular of the messaging. So have a think about what types of messages you're doing. what style of message and how often you're doing them is crucial. And it needs to be in line back to your values piece. You know, if you're a bit of a fun and quirky environment, then your communications can be fun and quirky. If you're quite serious, they probably need to be quite serious, but making sure that the type, the style and the frequency of the messaging is in line with your foundation. So you're really just adding on to the top there. Because ultimately, I love this quote, ultimately, you need to understand that your name is the richest jewel you can possibly be possessed of. Once it's kindled, it's easy to preserve it, but if you extinguish it, it's a difficult thing to rekindle. So I love this last bit of this quote. The way to a good reputation is to endeavour to be what you desire to appear. We all know that we have times when we're maybe not our best selves. We maybe don't do things quite as well as we would like, but if we always try and be the person that we would like to be, that's going to be the best way we can come across as being authentic, which is going to do the most work in terms of helping us to be remembered for the right reasons. So that's just a little bit there. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now and see if we have any questions or comments. Michelle?
If anybody does, feel free to write them. I just had a few little things that I jotted down from what you'd spoken about. And even that Socrates quote that you'd put, it's like fake it till you make it. Yeah, so even if you're not sure, just pretend you are. And I've noticed a lot actually in the communication area that, and even on social media, it doesn't have to be in people's presence, reading the room. And I've heard that quite a lot when people are making comments, you know, about, you know, things going on in America, and somebody will say, I don't think you're reading the room quite correctly. And I thought it's another saying of these times, like pivot.
Yeah, and you know, Michelle, that to me is that piece about when I talked about the 4-step agenda, that's the building rapport piece. Because if you jump in too quickly, I'm not saying you shouldn't, it's very important sometimes. This is where, you know, it is actually crucial sometimes to make sure you're communicating. And there are times when you might feel quite passionate about it, but if you don't put the background in to do it right, you'll actually have, you won't have the desired effect, because you're only going to have the desired effect if you bring people with you. So you're spot on there with the reading the room. That's why that building rapport, and sometimes that's one-on-one, sometimes that's through your communications, that's in lots of different ways, but it's crucial.
It is. And the other thing was the active listening, and it's a really hard skill to learn, but if you can learn it, it's probably, I think, one of the most valuable skills that you will ever have. But I just want to preempt that with, it's not just listening in a conversation, it's reading the full email.
And I would add to that as well, it's also reading body language. So sometimes the reading email is one, the other one is listening to the non-verbal cues. You know,
that's true.
My team will tell you I'm quite famous for saying your voice is saying yes, but your body is saying no. Can we talk about this? What's happening here? So yeah, that kind of really letting it come. And you're right, reading the full. And I've been very guilty of that in my time, not reading the full email. So.
We all are. And even reading anything, we all find that we just read a few words and think we get the message, but it's not always the case. And I think email and text message are probably two of the hardest ways to communicate exactly. But the other thing was personal branding. And I just did a short course on, you know, personal branding and what you want to represent. And I found it really interesting in that the way you think you are or you think you come across is not always the way that people see you. So it is good to ask questions or you know, people that you work with or, you know, or personally, like, you know, what are some good attributes about me and the way I do things, because they are definitely not always in line.
And you know, Michelle, what's really interesting about that, we even had this situation internally recently where you can communicate something and you can be absolutely sure that you've been really clear in your head, and you're talking about this from a personal branding and people's perception, but that happens with communication as well, where what somebody hears is so different. We actually had this where we put together our kind of COVID safe work plan and the return to work, and we, you know, shared it with everybody, and we said, okay, you know, the office is open again. It is voluntary. If you'd like to go back in, this is what it looks like. And one of our team members went to their manager. One of the first things they said was, so is it mandatory that I have to go in from Monday? And I'm thinking, I think I must have said the word voluntary 10 times in that presentation, but people hear what, you know, to your point. And the same with your personal branding. People don't always, they just make assumptions based on a little, even in this, you know, we've probably had people that have jumping in and out of emails and half listening, because we all do that when we're on webinars, right? So you get little glimpses and you make assumptions just based on certain glimpses. So,
I know none of our guys do that. I know you're all watching us avidly. Well, I just wanted to say thanks so much, Nina. I don't think anybody else has any questions, but thanks so much for joining us on our final live webinar of Rotomold Online. And I truly hope everyone's enjoyed the program, and all webinars will be available on recordings in an email I'll send out tomorrow. And I wish everyone, including Nina, a great week.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
Bye.
Bye-bye.